Funding for this program is provided by Bruce Foods Corporation, makers of the complete line of Cajun King seafood seasoning mixes and other distinctive Louisiana-style food products. And by the Dairy Farmers of Louisiana. When you want good programming, just add milk.
Louisiana. Hi, I'm Chef John Folse, welcoming you to the bayous of South Louisiana. Today, Cajun and Creole cooking holds a prime spot in the world of international cuisine, and I would love for you to know a little bit about it. So why not sit back, relax, and join me and some of my friends as we cook up another great Taste of Louisiana. And welcome to Taste of Louisiana. I'm Chef John Folse, and today we're cooking all of the foods of the great plantation era in Louisiana. You know, when most people think of plantations, they think of the antebellum era. Oh, the great houses that came up around the 1830s to the 1850s. Homes like Nottoway Plantation, Oak Alley, Homeless House. But there's also been a lot of plantations standing on the river since the late 1700s, like Magnolia Mound and my own restaurant, Viola Plantation in Donaldsonville, Louisiana. Oh yeah, you know, the antebellum plantation era was a great, great time in Louisiana. What beautiful homes they were. Here we're looking at Rosedown Plantation. Fact is, this plantation is built about 1830, and it's in St. Francisville, Louisiana, typical of some of the earlier plantation homes built outside. This doesn't exactly sit on the river. This sits in the little town of St. Francisville in, what parish is that? The Rolling Felicianas. Look at those Doric columns, reminiscent of the Roman days. Beautiful oak trees. Gardens were everywhere around the plantations, and every plantation had its own gardener. Fact is, fountains and beautiful oaks and azaleas and rose bushes, herb gardens were everywhere around the grand plantations. In addition to the garçonnières and pigeonnières, all of the outbuildings, of course, these little bitty gazebos were just dotted all around the landscape. It was a good place for people walking around and strolling through the gardens to take a little rest and sip on a mint julep or whatever other drink was being given out that day. The largest of all the plantation homes in Louisiana, this is Nottoway, built around, I guess, 1850. It's a later plantation, but definitely one of the largest ones ever built. Fact is, this plantation has over 100 rooms. Look at this side wing. Can you imagine about 1860 having a nice party in big gowns and beautiful tucks out on this wing, just strolling around this great gallery? What a beautiful, beautiful home. Here we're in Magnolia Mound Plantation. We're in the kitchen at Magnolia Mound. And this is open-hearth cooking. Boy, I tell you what a great time we had that day. In fact, as I spent some time out at Magnolia Mound watching these ladies do this great cooking. Here, I think we're doing a little bread pudding, and the bread pudding is put in a bowl and then into a black iron pot right over the fire, and it's going to actually poach there a little bit. Imagine the heat coming out of the front of this fireplace. The hot coals are just raked onto a little pile, and then pots would be put right on top of it to boil the water or cook the meat or whatever it was that was going to be cooking that particular day. I tell you, we had a great time in this kitchen. This was one of my first days of standing in front of an open hearth and feeling that heat coming out of the front of that thing. This is a pot of carrots, and to watch that pot come to a slow boil was very, very interesting to me. Here's a big pot of gumbo we're stirring, and I tell you, I put that wooden spoon into it and took a good sip of that gumbo, and I realized that there's something special about cooking over a big pecan wood or oak fire. There's a flavor that you'll get that you just won't get cooking on a stove of today. So there's something interesting about open hearth cooking that I want to continue to know a little bit about. Yeah, we spent about 2 or 3 hours in this kitchen talking to the ladies and reminiscing about the old days of Louisiana cooking. Look at this great fish. This is a carp or a buffalo, something that would have come out of the Mississippi River probably. and it's wired across a nice cypress board, and it's held in place with 2 nails in wire and then roasted or baked right along the side of the fireplace. The meat was so tender it was just about to fall off of the bones, and in the back of the fireplace was a nice big rack of venison sausages. In fact, we had a great lunch that day at Magnolia Mound Plantation. This is a reflector oven, and imagine putting 2 or 3 chickens or Cornish hens or little pigeon squabs inside of that little reflector oven and getting the flavor of those dishes. Fact is, it was a day I won't soon forget. And visiting with me in the kitchen a little bit later is Martha White, and Martha is in charge. She's working on a project over there. She's a volunteer at Magnolia Mound. She's in charge of the Foodways project, and Foodways is working with food from planting it in the ground to picking it up and serving it, cooking it, put it on the table, everything involving food in the early plantation days. Well, you know, we talk about plantation cooking, and when we talk about cooking of the South, we have to talk about plantation cooking because the plantation owners were wealthy enough to not only build those big, beautiful homes, but at the same time staff them with the cooks and the spices and the foods necessary to create great, great dishes. And the Mississippi River plantation homes, the ones that were on the river between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, had access to the waterway of the Mississippi and the steamboats bringing all the fresh ingredients necessary to prepare a lot of those great dishes. So not only did they grow a lot of things on the plantation, but also at the same time, a lot of goods were purchased, a lot of exotic goods and European goods to just continue to get great foods out of those plantation kitchens. What a great area it must have been. You know, some of the tools we were looking at, that open hearth cooking a minute ago, I want to show you a couple tools of early plantation cooking. This right here is called a sugar devil. And sugar was shipped in big casks or in cones. And when it came, the brown sugar came in the big barrels, this sugar devil would just be ground right into the sugar barrel and a piece pull out. Well, when the piece was pulled out, the ladies needed to cut it in some kind of way. So what we have here is a little sugar snip, and this would have cut the sugar off of the cone or cut the sugar off of the sugar devil, and then it would have been pounded in a glass or a bowl to get the granules the way we have today. Very interesting pieces of kitchen equipment from the early days. I really like this. This is a rotisserie, and the interesting thing about this rotisserie is that it's clock wound. There's a little clock movement right here, as well as a little wounding key that would turn chickens or meat or anything over the open hearth fire. Very interesting little piece from the early plantation days of Louisiana. Well, let's talk about some of the foods that would have been cooked then. I know you can see on this beautiful big platter I have here that I've got a big gigantic bacon hen, and this must be about a 7-pound hen. And what I've done with the hen is I've taken one of them and just cut them all apart because we're going to make chicken and dumplings, a dish that's almost synonymous with Southern cooking and certainly plantation cooking after the 1850s. A lot of people attribute chicken and dumplings to the English side of cooking. However, the French, the Spanish, all had their own rendition of chicken and dumplings, and we're going to talk about the Creole version of this dish today. As you can see, I've taken all of the chicken. I'll bring my little black pot here because we have to make a chicken stock. So I'm going to take the chicken meat that's already been cut into 6 or 7 pieces and put into the little Dutch oven, as well as carrots and celery and all of those nice fresh vegetables. And this is the chicken fat. Now, you would say, gee, am I going to put that in the pot? Well, of course you are, because that's going to give the stock a nice golden color. That would go right down into the dish. Of course, a little pepper. Have a little pepper, a little salt, some bay leaves, any of the spices that would have been found anywhere around the plantation or on the plantation or would have been brought over from Europe, because remember, those boats were coming up the Mississippi River. Now a little water would have gone into the pot, and the chicken would have been boiled until it was nice and tender and falling off of the bones. And I've already done some, so I'm going to move this out of the way so I can show you exactly what the finished product would look like and how we would get there. Okay, now I have the deboned chicken all in a nice little bowl here. And I've reserved all of the chicken broth because I've boiled the chicken for about an hour or so to get all of the, not only the meat off of the bones, but at the same time, the flavor of the chicken into the water. That's one of the most important things. In English chicken and dumplings, that would have been about the end of the story. They would have eaten the broth as a nice bouillon, as a nice consommé. However, not in Creole cooking. In Creole cooking, we would begin by putting a little bit, butter. There was, of course, butter in the plantations, or lard, or one of the sweet oils, as it was called, like olive oil, into the bottom of the old pot. I love this old pot right here, just really nice pot. And then the Creoles would have flavored it, of course, with a little onions, celery, whatever fresh vegetable seasonings were growing around the plantation. Of course, there was always good onions and celery and a touch of garlic down into the pot. What we're going to make here is almost a French version of this dish, borrowed with a little bit of the Provence style, and we're going to make a little blonde roux down into the bottom of the pot, and that would have thickened the broth, which is totally different from the English version. A little bit flour. I'm going to dust about equal parts of flour and butter, because that's about what it takes for the flour to pick up all of that butter. Otherwise, we'll have oil floating on the top of our chicken and dumplings. See how that all comes together? Maybe just a little bit more flour. You notice I'm not measuring here, and that's something that's common to our style of cooking. Just kind of put it on in the pot and use sight. There were very little recipes handed down back in the plantation days because very few people could actually read recipes. So unless you actually sat down and watched somebody cook, chances were pretty good you may not remember the recipe. Into the roux, I'm going to put some of this great chicken stock where, all day long that chicken was boiling. I'm going to put it down into the pot. And you can imagine as I stir this, look how that stock is picked up by the roux. See how great that is? And you just keep adding stock until you get the consistency of the sauce that you feel is exactly what you want. Everybody had a different recipe for the dish. And of course, as I say, the English just used the broth by itself. So you can imagine how many variations there were from just a thin broth chicken and dumplings all the way up to the Creole or Spanish or French version of the dish in Louisiana. How nice and thick that is. You can see the color of this is nice and creamy looking. This is called a velouté. So, any stock that's thickened with a little roux. Now, of course, you can imagine the flavor in this pot because this is done with a nice, rich chicken stock. How pretty that is. Again, I'll add just a little more stock because I want the right consistency here for this dish. And that's how this dish differs from the English version. Instead of the stock, we have a nice, thick, almost like an etouffee, or almost like a nice stew into this black iron kettle. Now the chicken. The chicken is already cooked, of course, so it won't take very long to heat it all up and flavor the stock. Get that chicken in my pot. How nice that looks. And of course, for color, we could use anything that we wanted to. I could put a little red sweet bell pepper. Again, remember, this is a Creole dish. A little green bell pepper down into the dish. And again, you would want to check for flavoring depending on how much salt and pepper actually went into the stock as you were making it, or the flavorings that went into the stock. But look how nice all of these pretty colors come together. You can see how nice and thick the broth is, unlike just a consommé down into the pot. Now, we would let this cook. We would allow this to cook for about 30 minutes or so for all of the great flavors to come together. And at this time, I would make the dumplings that's going to go into the pot for chicken and dumplings. Now, again, dumplings are quite English. However, there's a lot of different dumplings, quenelles, biscuits that would have been used with this dish from all nationalities. And I'm going to do a little dumpling here that's pretty much considered French. I'm going to put into, I guess this is about 1.5 cups of flour. I'm going to cut into that, about 1/4 cup of lard or butter. And the important thing when making dumplings is that you want to put the butter and oil into the flour and cut it in to get it really mixed well into the bowl. And it'll almost look like cornmeal if it's done right by the time all of the flour is coated with the lard or the butter or the shortening, whatever it is that you're going to use. Continue to stir that around just a little bit. Chicken and dumplings from the Creole side of the plantation days. Now into that, I'm going to put a little egg, 1 egg. And again, you would just continue mixing until all of the dumplings start to come together. And then just enough milk to make a nice batter. And once you put the milk into it, I'll just show you how it's done here. I won't finish this all the way because naturally I have some already done. And then you would season it with whatever seasonings you would normally like. I would put into this, let's put a little pepper, a little touch of salt, and then continue mixing it all together. And then you would put it onto a floured board, just like the cutting board I have here, and you would roll it out with a rolling pin. And I'll just move this right out of the way because I have a piece already rolled out. I want to show you exactly how that's done. Look at that, really nice and roll out good and flat. That's the important thing. And then you can take, you don't want to mix it too much because it'll get your dough pretty hard. So you want to just cut your dumplings in this style. Just make nice strips out of them. And just go right down like this. And cut them about 2 inches or so. Everybody's got a different recipe for this. And there's a lot of different variations for the dumpling dough. Some people call for no eggs. Some call for eggs. And you put it right down into the sauce. Now, the important thing about the dumplings in this dish is that once the dumplings go into the chicken and dumpling pot, you want to put a cover on top of it, and you don't want to stir it anymore because the dumplings will actually just break up in here, and you don't want that to happen. So this would cook now for, I guess about a half hour or so, 15 minutes or so, until the dumplings get nice and tender, and then it would be served on top of on a nice bowl with dressing or rice on the side, whatever you would normally do with good chicken and dumplings in a plantation in Louisiana. I want to show you a couple dishes that we also associate with Louisiana plantation cooking. Now, you saw those little squabs or those little Cornish hen baking in that reflector oven. Look at these, already done. There were a lot of game birds on the plantation, so this would have been quite common, this dish. This is little Cornish hen baked at about 350 degrees, for about an hour or so until golden brown. A really nice little dish. Eggplant, one of the premier dishes of plantation cooking. And eggplant was done in many, many different ways, but this is stuffed with crawfish. Of course, we stuffed the eggplant with shrimp, crab meat, ground beef, pork, whatever was available on the plantation. However, this is a river road plantation, and crawfish was #1. I've got to show you these beautiful biscuits. This is angel biscuits, very, very light, a little baking powder into the batter, and little baking soda also to make them real light. And imagine splitting one of these in half and putting a ladle of that chicken and dumplings right on top of that big biscuit. Quite ordinary in the city of New Orleans, some would say, but I'd say just fabulous. Good biscuits with chicken and dumplings. Okay, this, as I say, will cook for about another, 15 minutes or so. We'll season it with a little salt and pepper, and it'll be just perfect. Chicken and dumplings, plantation style. Well, I told y'all I had a friend coming to visit in the kitchen, and Martha White, a great, great friend of mine from Magnolia Mound Plantation. Hey, Martha. Oh, come see, come sa. How are you doing? Good to see you. What do you have for me?
Brought you some herbs from the kitchen garden. I'm a little late, I think, to put them in the chicken. But
You're never too late to put herbs in the pot. You know that.
But we have a variety here. Of course, everyone knows basil. We have tarragon that we'll use later in salad, if you wish.
Yeah, sure. So all of these are grown right at Magnolia Mound Plantation. So y'all keep a lot of good herbs going all the time.
We try to. It's a little hard.
Well, great. We're going
and some garlic chives right here. You see, they're flat.
Right.
You see? Okay, they're different from the onion chives.
Have a great, great garlic flavor.
Yeah, they have a good flavor. Here's a little Sweet marjoram back here. We might put a little dab of that in the salad, not too much.
Was this pretty typical of early plantation days, that all of these...
we find that they used a lot of herbs in the French cooking. You see, we're at Magnolia Mound, we're talking about a French family, not Acadian French, but Monsieur de Plancher was from France directly, and his wife, Madame, was a Creole from Mobile. So it's a combination.
Let me ask you, Mother, how did you get involved in all of this? I spent a day over there. It was just so intriguing to me. How did you get involved in that project?
Well, about 11 years or so ago, we built the kitchen. It's a reconstructed kitchen, but most of the kitchens in the southern plantations would have been detached from the house. And so probably at some time or another, the original kitchen burned down. So we built a kitchen, and we called in some consultants who work with food waste programs, and they taught us how to do open hearth cooking.
What is the most difficult task when go ahead and stir that pot? That's what I did. That's what I did when I was in your kitchen. I got right in the pots. What's the most difficult task in open hearth cooking? It seemed difficult to me, coming from a professional kitchen, coming from the restaurant kitchen. I thought to myself, gee, what geniuses these people must have been.
Well, it's hard to time everything, but we don't necessarily have to time everything perfect, because we don't think they did in the early 1800s, and we're not serving as you do in the restaurant. Meals were long and leisurely, and I think the cooks had enough time to do what they needed to do.
So they could just take that time.
And they ate a lot of lukewarm food. By the time they hauled it over to the kitchen and put it up on the sideboard or whatever, I expect it was not as hot as it might be or as cold as it might be.
Did most of the foods cooked in the plantation kitchen actually come from the plantations?
A good many did, and we do try to cook seasonal things when we're demonstrating for the public. But we find that on bills of lading and so on from New Orleans, we find all sorts of items that came from Europe by ship to New Orleans. So if you were an affluent family and if you lived right on the river, you were able to import things from particularly along the Mediterranean, Spain, France, that sort of thing.
There's stories that abound in plantation life about the affluency of a lot of these plantation owners. Let me cut the fire down
We're talking about maybe 10 or 15% of the population could afford these sort of things.
Well, plantations like Valcourame's La Petite Versailles in Vacherie, Louisiana, was a plantation that, in the history of plantations, was probably one of the most affluent. And we hear stories about when his daughter got married, they put spider webs in the trees and put gold dust on it. But were these people actually so rich that they could throw gold dust into the trees?
Probably so, but remember, we're talking about a very short period of time. We're talking maybe 30 years, you see, before the war.
Right.
Because when Eli Whitney over in Georgia invented his little machine to remove the seeds from cotton, and DeBoer down in New Orleans, in the area of the Audubon Park area, when he figured out how to granulate sugar, he'd studied down in the islands and so on. Well, then these inventions speeded up the plantation system, and they could change their economy some, and they brought in more slaves and so on, and then they started getting richer.
Well, I want you to help me do a dish that I saw the dressing actually being done. We can leave those herbs right there. I've got some black-eyed peas, and I want to do a black-eyed pea salad, but I want to do a dressing that was typical of, say, pre-1830 plantation days, and that would have been what?
Well, more of a French dressing with the sweet oil, the olive oil.
Hey.
Vinegar. You need about twice as much olive oil as vinegar.
Okay. I've got a bowl here now. Do you want to mix the oils first?
Well, let's get a little mustard.
Okay, well, I have dried mustard, and I have
Okay, well, let's
Creole
pretend we've
mustard.
already made our mustard from the dried mustard, so let's use a Creole.
So
but
they would have mixed
started
oil.
with that.
Yeah, okay, they would have mixed oil in there. So we'll put, how much Creole mustard you want to put in here? About that much?
That's good.
Okay. And what, little salt and pepper?
Little salt and pepper.
Okay. Now, you're going to have to tell me when here, because, us Cajun plantations ate a little bit more pepper, huh? Little salt.
little salt.
A little salt.
Right,
Okay, now,
all right,
red
but we're going to
wine
have to
vinegar?
grind up some, not half as much vinegar as oil, probably.
Okay, well, let's see here. I'm going to put about,
much
I've
do
got
you
a
want?
lot of black-eyed peas, so what about that much vinegar?
All right, let's try that and see what we come up with.
And I've got this great old olive oil bottle here.
All right, that was shipped from the Mediterranean countries in great big olas, those great big pottery jars. The jars were also used as ballast in the ships. And so
Those are the big clay jars,
yeah,
the really big
great big things. And sometimes they contained olives, sometimes just the oil, and then the containers were used later for storage.
Okay. Now I'm going to pour a little bit of the olive oil down into...
A good bit.
A good bit? Okay, about twice as much, you say?
Yeah, I think so.
You know, in all the research that you've done on the foods of Plantation Days, did you find any of the traditional foods that we think of as traditional in Louisiana today, gumbo or jambalaya?
We found them, but sometimes they just referred to them by name. They didn't necessarily write it down. Some of the receipts, as they were called, were merely reminders. We even found bread recipes that didn't contain flour. They had other things, and they were just reminding a cook or the madame of the house, reminding her of what she would need. And probably that slave cook couldn't read a recipe anyway. So we find a lot of references to things that, but not necessarily all the ingredients laid out for us.
One of the things that I noticed when I was in the plantation is that everybody was standing in front of the, go ahead and put some herbs in there because we're going to pour it right on top of here. Okay. One of the things that I noticed in the plantation was that everybody was standing in front of the fireplaces with those long dresses. It must have presented a little danger in those days also.
It was very dangerous. Let's see, I'm looking for...
I'm going to put a little color in here. Okay. And now look, as much as I hate to do this, I'm out of time on this recipe already. So we're going to pour this vinaigrette right on top of the peas. And I'll tell you what, I promise that I'll chop it up next time. I guarantee you. I'll chop it up.
Well, here's your tarragon now. You've got to have some tarragon.
Look, I can't thank you enough for coming and visit with us today and teach me a little bit more about all of this. And thank all of you for watching us cook these good plantation recipes. And come back next time as we create more of these great Taste of Louisiana. Okay, let's chop up the herbs now. I'll chop them up.
Look, don't chop the tarragon.
Put it on in there.
This is lemon balm.
Funding for this program was provided by Bruce Foods Corporation, makers of Bruce's Yams and other distinctive Louisiana-style food products. And by the Dairy Farmers of Louisiana. Fresh ideas in cooking begin with milk.